Wendell Cox, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Great to have you here. You are a person who is in demographics and transportation and city planning, city fiscal planning, and you're a consultant, and you worked for many years for the city of Los Angeles. And you're here. Give me a handle on why you're here and what you'll be doing while you're here.
I'm here principally to give a presentation to the Smart Business Hawaii Conference, and then visiting with other people around the city and media people like you and so on.
Mm-hmm. And that'll be, in one of the hotels?
Yes, at the Ala Moana Hotel.
Okay.
Right.
Now, in addition to that, you've taken a ride on the rail path as
Right.
it now exists.
Right, I have.
And you're here to try to help us understand, and we're happy that you're here. We need consultation once in a while to assist in our existing consultation, if you will. But I would like to get your handle on the general fiscal health of the city of Honolulu. Can you help us with that?
Be glad to try to help you, but let me tell you a little bit about where I've been in life, so maybe that will help your viewers better understand where I'm coming from.
Please.
In 1977, Tom Bradley, who was mayor of L.A., Los Angeles, appointed me to the board of the Los Angeles County Transportation Commission, which was oversaw all the transit and highways in Los Angeles County, 10 million people now. And that's where I really got my start. So I've been involved in urban policy since that time. I've spent 9 years as a visiting professor at the largest university in France, the largest public university in France, and done a lot in urban policy, rail, demographics, and so on. But
what a great life!
Oh, it is. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. No end of difficulties. But I think as you in Honolulu sort of look at your situation, I think it's important to step back and look at the broader context. And I'm not talking about Honolulu. I'm not even talking about the United States. I'm talking about the broader context of the financial situation the world is in right now. We in the United States have a budget deficit that is greater per gross domestic product than that of Greece at the moment.
That's pretty serious.
It is very serious.
A question, why don't we know this?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. There is not, I don't think, enough of an understanding or an appreciation of the situation that we, the world, have managed to get ourselves into. Now, I happen to believe the United States is in a little bit better shape than Europe. We're not sure whether it's in better shape than China, but you think about the European Union, which is an economy that's about the same size as ours, could well not exist in its current form next year. I mean, we could see countries leaving the euro. We could see serious financial difficulties. We will pay the price for that as well. We see the Chinese housing market that has exploded. There's great concern about now declining prices and declining economic growth. And China is now big enough that a serious downturn in China could hurt us also. So we have that environment. Then we have the environment of having had in this country and around the world the worst economic decline in 80 years. Household wealth is down from where it was even 6 or 7 years ago.
As they say, the younger generation is less affluent than its parents.
The sad thing about it is we have seen a transfer of wealth from the young to the old, as it were, or from the younger to the older, like has never happened before. So you have this situation where, in this country, for example, we have huge unfunded pension liabilities. Virtually across the board. And I'll talk in a few minutes about the situation in Honolulu and Hawaii. Anyone who thinks that we are going to solve this financial problem, that this is sort of like all others before, doesn't understand some very important differences. The big problem is, especially, for example, with respect to unfunded liabilities, California at this point, $500 billion in unfunded liabilities. Now, granted, California is bigger than Hawaii, but still huge. So my point is that we have managed to get ourselves into a financial position that is unbelievable. It might be, if we could do it again, we would probably step back and say, well, let's not do this, but we can't. And once you make promises to people, you can't take them back. And that is, in the broader context, where we are at this point in this society And what that says in Honolulu, or if we're in Tulsa, or if we're in Dayton, what it says is we have got to be very careful about what we do, and we've got to make sure we understand it is no longer 1995 or 1985. The economy is not good, and we need to be very careful.
The country doesn't have as much money. It has been spending as if it had more money.
Right.
And it has not attended to infrastructure, and I include everything in that,
That's right.
including unfunded pension liabilities.
Exactly.
So we've left our infrastructure to deteriorate in all ways. This is really too bad. And we didn't really know it, did we?
No.
It just happened.
Well, all along there have been people who have been saying, well, we're getting ourselves into trouble, but nobody ever pays attention to those people, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it is a real problem.
So Honolulu, can we look at Honolulu, how it compares specifically?
Well, you think about, we again start, I think, with the unfunded pension liability. You know, the statewide at this point, the average household has, the total unfunded pension liability of the state on a statewide basis per household is $14,000, okay? That is up $4,000 from 4 years ago. So that's going up at a very rapid rate. And if you go back and look at the change, say, since 2000, you'll find a huge increase. All sorts of reasons that that is happening. Then, if you look then at the city and county of Honolulu, you have what we call post-employment benefits, the retiree health care benefits. The per household unfunded liability on those benefits has gone up $2,000 in 4 years. So now, just over 4 years, if you basically say the Hawaii per capita amount is the same as the Honolulu per capita amount on the state and local, you have a situation where we have seen per household unfunded liabilities on pensions and post-employment benefits go up $6,000. This can't continue, but it will, because the state of Hawaii's actuarial consultants have basically said, the state has not been putting enough money in, and this is going on all over the country. You know, every year, the actuaries tell the state how much money you've got to put in the system to fully fund it. But over and over, in many cases, there has not been enough money put in. There have also been the assumptions that the pension funds are going to earn 8% a year. Well, not in this economy.
Yeah.
That means the actuaries are telling the state you're probably going to have to increase the amount of money you're putting in. The other thing is that the state employees and the local employees are getting higher salaries than was anticipated, and they're living longer. So that means, you know, somebody that lives to 95 is going to need more in health care than someone who lives to 70.
It takes more retirement out of the system.
Exactly. So this unfunded liability with respect to the two pension programs is huge. And really, that's just the beginning.
Sure.
You look then at some of the other important infrastructure issues in Honolulu, the sewer system and the consent decree and so on. Former Mayor Hanneman tells us that over the next 25 years, you're going to see sewer bills go up to $300 per household. That's rather big.
On top of everything else. You know.
Exactly. And who knows where that's going to go. And because, for example, you've got to do major improvements to secondary treatment of sewage. Some people are saying it's going to cost 1.7 of about the $5 billion you need to be spending. Who knows? I mean, we have seen infrastructure projects balloon in size. So that's a real problem.
The thing about the sewer that's interesting is it has a direct relationship to the engine of our economy, tourism. So you really can't have sewer problems, for example, in Waikiki, if you expect to draw tourists there.
Well, more important, and perhaps this is going a little bit too far, but what's the difference between Manila and Honolulu? The difference between Manila and Honolulu, the difference between a first world civilized city and a third world city with problems, a charming place but still with problems, you cannot have a first world city without adequate sewers. And you can't have the kind of problems you've had in Waikiki and elsewhere where you have these problems that secondary treatment would solve. But even with the sewers, you go further than that. You have the water people now from the city and county because so many of your pipes are so old, having to raise the water rate 70% over 5 years. Um, the city council budget chair said the other day something to the effect, I don't know how people are going to afford it. And so you have these challenges, and then think about the fact, you want to know who's the fifth most costly city in the country to live in out of the top 60? It's called Honolulu. I mean, yes, San Francisco's more expensive, and San Jose's more expensive, but the fact is where I live, St. Louis. And by the way, whatever you think about St. Louis, not a bad place to live.
Thank you.
My dollars are worth, I'm sorry, you're paying $1.50 for every dollar I pay. Okay,
Ooh.
so and the point is that there are a bunch of places around the country that are less expensive, and one of the serious difficulties that Honolulu has is its lack of competitiveness in terms of the cost of living.
Yeah, true.
So the middle class is being squeezed from both ends in Honolulu.
Let me add that salaries here are below the norm.
Right.
So you have all these factors working. And don't forget the roadways. Can we talk about the roadways?
Yeah, indeed. For example, you have 3 years ago, 4 years ago, the data showed that before the beginning of the great financial crisis, you had the worst congestion in the country. Better than that little community called Los Angeles. Worse than that. Terrible. If you look, now you're now second because you've actually, your traffic congestion has gotten better. But you think about, you are at this point maybe the 54th or 55th largest metropolitan area in the country, and you have the second worst traffic congestion and sometimes the first. And if you ever have a restoration of prosperity, which you will have at least in some measure, you're liable to pass LA again. And to give you an idea how bad it is, okay, INRIX, which is the traffic reporting firm, rates traffic in 200 cities in the US and Europe. And there are only 2 cities that rank in the worst 20 that are in the United States. Number 1 is Los Angeles, and number 16 is Honolulu. Now, granted, 16 is not as bad as 1, but the fact is you have real world-class, traffic congestion. So that is a real problem. But let me also say, with respect to the cost of living, there's another thing you ought to be aware of. I am involved every year in the publication of something we call the Demographia International Housing Affordability Survey. We're doing our 8th version this year. There will be 325 metropolitan areas reviewed. Last year, you want to know what was the most expensive relative to India, the most expensive housing market in the United States?
Right here.
It was called Honolulu, okay? You ranked like 4th or 5th. We do 7 countries, actually 6 countries plus Hong Kong. Hong Kong was worst. Second worst was Sydney, Australia. Third worst was Vancouver, and you were 4th. Now, you can't, and then you add to that, I mean, there just are a lot of challenges you face. Add to that over the last decade, you saw 50,000 people move from Oahu to other parts of the nation. Some of them moved to Kauai, and some moved to Hawaii, and some moved to the mainland. The rest of the state actually gained about 28,000 domestic migrants. But the basic point is, if you look at where people are moving, and where people are moving is generally where business is getting better, you will find that affordability, that is cost of living, which is driven by housing affordability, is the issue. So that is a real problem.
Oh, yeah. And we have the homeless to show for it. You know, you describe a situation where these various factors are eating away at the economic fabric, the balance of the place. And probably the most obvious metric is the homeless.
Right.
So they sort of fall off the side, and the increase in these factors is going to create more people falling off the side.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, I mean, we're doubtless going to see some economic recovery. But again, the financial challenges that we've managed to create, whether we're talking about Honolulu or the rest of the country or Europe or China, it's just a real serious challenge.
Well, a destination resort cannot afford to have such a challenge, because once it becomes visible, we're no longer the pristine, and appealing tropical paradise.
Well, no. I mean, clearly you have to get the sewage system under control. No question about that.
And the homeless.
Yes, yes. Well, and the other thing is, too, if you look at the local plans on transportation, for example, basically we're talking, right now they have a 2035 horizon for planning. We're looking at a situation where there's going to be something like $25 billion spent on transportation in the next 25 years in this county, in this city and county. And you know what traffic congestion is going to be like? Worse, not better. And you can look at what people consider among the most important problems in Oahu. Traffic congestion is always right at the top. So this is real important because there's a good deal of international research that says that one of the things that improves the economy of a city is the ability of people to get to more jobs
Sure.
in a particular period
Get
of
around
time.
and do their business. If you sit in your
Exactly.
car doing nothing, you're not producing anything.
Exactly. Exactly. So all of that is to say is you do have your challenges, and I guess my message, for example, on the rail issue is you really need, as you look at the future and you think about spending money, to spend money on those things you really need. Now, we know that you need to deal with the sewage. We know that you cannot have substandard water or lose half your water because of bad pipes. These are things that must be done. While we might sit back and say, wouldn't it be wonderful if our leaders in the state capitol had not given away these pension benefits, or our leaders in the city and county, the fact is they did. And we have to pay those. We can't not
Right,
pay
can't
those.
go back, right.
So now what do you get to? Now you get to, and there are other things too, the water. What you get to with respect to the rail system is this something we really need? Is this something that if we don't do 35 years from now, we are going to have sewage in the street, we're going to not have clean water, and we're going to have who knows what kind of economic difficulties we would have if we could find a way to say no to public employees, which we can't.
And the difference is that rail we can stop.
Exactly.
We haven't really started it yet.
Well, I guess the question you have to ask about rail is what does it get us? Okay? If it were as important as sewage, I'd say you ought to do it. But it's not. I mean, what is the downside if you don't do rail? The downside is you don't spend a whole lot of money to accomplish not a whole lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what looking at it now, as from your point of view, coming to town and looking at it, what, in the best case analysis, what could rail do for Honolulu?
Really nothing. For example, think about this. Washington, D.C., the metropolitan area, has built by far the largest rail system in the United States over the last 35 years, now more than 100 miles. One of the main justifications for building the rail system was to relieve traffic congestion. What has happened over the intervening years is that Washington, D.C. is almost as bad in traffic as Honolulu is, and getting worse, okay? Now, the nice thing about Washington is that they have really every year looked very closely at the impact of traffic coming into downtown, because a lot of people don't understand what transit does best. Now, transit is very good. Transit is very effective. 75% of the people who work south of 59th Street in New York get to work on transit, okay? However, when you get outside that, not as many do. And so you need some certain circumstances for it to work. So downtown Washington is where you would expect transit to have the biggest impact. Every year, the Washington Council of Governments goes out and counts the traffic and counts the people on the train. Here's what's happened. We have seen a big increase in people who used to be in cars moving to the train, 90% of whom are carpool passengers. In other words, only 10% of the people who got out of cars into train were drivers. Now, you don't reduce traffic congestion by taking people out of passenger seats. Okay? That's the best you can hope for. And you think about this system, which starts out in prime agricultural land. It clearly looks, with all due respect, like a land development project to me. Okay, you look at this project. Right now, I'm told you have something like 75,000 people out there on the other side of Pearl Harbor. The hope is, the plan is we're going to get to 150,000 perhaps by 2030. Now, anyone who thinks that you are going to add 75,000 people out there and not impact the H1 across the city incredibly doesn't understand how these things work. There is no way that the number of people that live out there that will get on the train will be that large, and there are a number of reasons for that. The biggest reason is we all need to understand that not everybody works downtown. And think about as you look at that line, and I don't care what line it is you build, you could build a line anywhere you want on this island. Okay, look at the stations and ask, how many jobs are there within 1/4 mile of that station? Because that's all people will walk. Now, downtown, it works real well. You realize that only 10% of the jobs in Oahu are downtown?
I do know that, and that's the remarkable thing about it.
Yeah.
There's just not that many people, and you want to build this whole thing for only a few people.
Well, and the point is that if you look at the Oahu MPO projections, downtown employment doesn't even grow as fast as the rest of the county in the next 25 years. And by the way, don't feel bad about 10% of downtown of the employment being downtown. Only 20% of employment in New York is downtown. Only 10% of employment in San Francisco is downtown. You have these marvelous, impressive downtown areas with all their skyscrapers, and you know what? They account for 10 to 15% of the employment usually.
Low occupancy, all these buildings around you. And you know, the way it's worked is this is the professional area, the service area,
Right.
supports business. But a lot of the work that the professionals and service people in these buildings used to do traditionally is being done in LA. And that's the way the country works.
Well, yeah, or it's being done in Sioux Falls,
Or it's
in
being
South
done-
Dakota.
Or being done on a computer.
That's right.
With fewer people and so forth. So downtown as a place of gathering is actually, you know, a phenomenon in this town which is declining, in my view.
Well, it really is declining everywhere. I mean, around the country, downtown areas are doing relatively well. You have some young people that are moving into what we would call yuppie districts, and very small portions are doing better. But you look at the data. I mean, during the 1990s, or excuse me, during the 2000, the first decade of the 2000s, I was continually in debate with people with whom I disagree with on the issue of what's happening in the city. The story was, everybody's moving back to the city. Look at the renaissance that's going on. The suburbs are being abandoned. And then the great financial crisis happens, and you can't believe the hallucinations that these people had about empty suburbs and so on. And so then the 2010 census came along, and I'm a columnist on the website newgeography.com. Every time the Census Bureau put out the results on another metropolitan area, I had an article, and every one of them, one or two cases, basically said the suburbs continue to grow faster than the central cities, and in some cases, not Honolulu, the central cities are actually declining. So the move to the suburbs continues. We don't see the huge decline of the cities that we saw, say, in the 1970s for all sorts of reasons.
That's true, yeah.
And it's wonderful that downtowns are doing better, but the world is not moving downtown.
Yep.
And what we were able to show by some research is that essentially, if you look at the people who were 25 to 35 in the country, and where are they now that they're 35 to 45, 10 years later, you find huge exodus of these people from the central cities. So, and from the downtown areas. So what we have to recognize is that downtown has its role, but downtown is never going to be what us older people remember it to have been many years ago.
Well, we were less mobile. And
Right.
I think one of the things inherent in what you're saying is that we're more mobile now. And in the course of a lifetime, a career, if you will, or multiple careers, because that's more the case,
Right.
You know, people move a lot. They don't stay in one place. They don't, and their workplace doesn't stay in one place. And if you have that, you really wonder whether it's useful to have a fixed transportation system.
Well, no, it really isn't. I mean, you think about the fact that something like, according to the MPO data, something like 94, 95% of trips on Oahu are by car. If you were to count them based upon the number of miles that people traveled, it would really probably be more like 97% or maybe even 98%. The problem is that there is no transit system that has ever been proposed or even thought of that can replace the automobile. Now, a lot of people may not like that, but the automobile provides a mobility you can't believe. I mean, you can start out in the morning at any place on this island and get any other place by car. Now, maybe some trips may take you a little bit longer. You can't do that on transit, and if you can, it's going to take twice as long. That's not to say that transit doesn't have a role, but we need to recognize it's largely getting people to downtown. and it's secondarily, or maybe the most important, is low-income people and providing mobility there. But you can't. There is no transit system that has been designed that can replace the mobility of the automobile, whether we like it or not. And that's crucial from an economic perspective. Because if you, for example, I don't know where you live and it's not important, but let's say you're the average American, and every morning you spend 25 minutes getting to work and you spend 25 minutes getting home. If you have to spend 2 hours instead of 50 minutes, what does that do to your productivity? And then multiply that by the nearly 1 million people that live on this island. It is a big deal.
Imagine what that's worth. It's huge.
Exactly.
Well, I grew up in New York.
Right, good.
When I grew up in New York, very few people had cars. And I think that's probably true, at least for some of the demographics today. They don't have cars. They don't need cars. But the fact is that the whole city grew up around people who didn't need cars, didn't use cars. And the rail, the elevated rail, then the underground rail, people didn't need cars for that. It's not the same anymore. Now they have cars. The whole American model has changed all over, everywhere. And for people, a lot of people say, well, look how successful rail is in Washington or New York. Not really.
No,
Those
not
are
at all.
sui generis anyway.
Well, you think about New York. I mean, New York did not choose rail and not the cars. I mean, the fact is, when the IRT was built in the early 1900s, okay, people didn't have cars. And so New York grew. New York is a pre-automobile city. I mean, New York had, my goodness, Manhattan, I believe, was close to 2 million people by 1900. So we don't even have cars at this point. So, and granted, New York has managed to maintain its rail system, not the best, but it still works. But what a lot of people don't realize is, think about, in 1950, the city of New York had 8 million people, and the suburbs had 4 million. 2010, the city of New York has 8 million people, and the suburbs have 12 million. All of the growth has been in the suburbs. But it's not, a lot of people will go to Europe and think, oh, well, they all ride trains in Europe, they all live in the city in Europe. Let's talk about Paris, pretty good-sized European city, the largest metropolitan area in Europe. In 1950, there were almost 3 million people in Paris, in the city of Paris. Today, there are almost 2 million people in the city of Paris. And today there are almost 10 million people in the suburbs. Paris has sprawled like the worst sprawl of any American city. And you cannot go to a single city in the first world, with the possible exception of Hong Kong, and I would argue about that, where you have not seen the bulk of the growth be in the suburbs. So, and what that means is automobiles. And so that you can go to places around the world and find that they have built rail systems, and they do a nice job of getting people to downtown. The huge increase everywhere has been in automobile use. And it's like they told me when I was in Brazil a few years ago, in Brazil, people get cars even before they can afford them.
Gee, what an idea. Well, and later, when I got older, I saw everybody moving to the suburbs. Why did they go to the suburbs? Well, in large part, they went because they had greater mobility in the suburbs. And they could take the Long Island Railroad, for example,
Right.
into Manhattan. But in their daily lives, their shopping and all the things you do, they were driving. And so the people who didn't have cars and they lived in the city now got cars, and they had a better time of it. And I think that's a sort of a microcosm for the whole country. And from the year, say, 1900 to the year 2000, look at all the cars. And we have gotten used to it. It is our thing. It is our culture.
But it's not just our culture. I've spent a lot of time in China in the last 3 or 4 years. I've got friends in China. I talk to them and I say, and they all live in these marvelous new high-rise buildings. They're really very attractive. And would you like to have what they call a villa, a detached? I'd give anything to live in a villa. Well, do you think they can afford to? Not a chance. And so you think about the suburbanization that's happened in New York, and a lot of people don't realize New York is the most sprawling city in the world. Okay, covers more. It starts at Bridgeport and goes all the way down to New Brunswick. Okay. The fact is that in New York, what happened is people moved to the suburbs because they could afford a patch of land, a place to let the kids grow, nicer houses, larger houses. That's what's going on all over. And everywhere you see this around the world, the same thing is going on. So yes, indeed, we have, for example, the American dream of home ownership, and it's still alive. People still believe in it and still want it. But let me tell you, they talk about the great Australian dream in Australia. They talk about the Canadian dream in Canada. And everywhere you go, you will find what the people want. They generally want to have a house with a little bit of space. And if you're going to buy that, you got to be in the suburbs where land is cheap. It's the only place it's available. They want to have a car to get around. I was just very quickly, I was teaching a class in Paris a few years ago, largely composed of students from the old French colonies of West Africa. And these are kids that have been sent up to go to school and they're going to go home. And I asked them, how many of you want cars eventually? And every one of them wanted
Sure.
And I said, why do you want cars? And one of the kids said, because they're my feet.
So, and then the other thing about cars and roads is that you can build them to to comport with the existing development of the population, which you can't do so easily with any other system. Roads in this country have changed and expanded, and it's become a science. Look at LA. I mean, some people think it's too much, but the fact is we can build a road to anywhere we want to go.
Well, the thing about the roads is that they are a comprehensive system.
Yeah.
You get into your car and you drive out onto this road system, and this system again takes you anywhere you want in the entire city and county or in the entire Los Angeles area. The problem with transit is it's only a partial system. Now, it does a really good job. I mean, if you lived in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and you worked in Manhattan, you'd be a fool not to be on the New Jersey Transit commuter train. On the other hand, only 20% of people in the metropolitan area of New York work in Manhattan. 80% of the jobs are outside. And that's how we have changed. And again, you go anywhere you want. I mean, you go to Tokyo. What you're going to find is 80% of jobs are outside what they call the Yamanote Loop. They're suburbanized there as well. The second most sprawling city in the world, by the way.
Well, so, then you say, well, why can't we just design a system that will use the roads and improve the cars, improve the way the cars work, improve the traffic systems, improve traffic congestion relief with using modern technology. And I suggest to you, you're the expert, but I suggest to you is we really haven't done that. We should be doing that, but we haven't put the money where the most obvious model is.
Well, I would argue a couple of things on that. We don't need to put the money anywhere. Okay? We need entrepreneurs to do that. That's the whole problem with transportation planning in this country. We have these strategies. We, the collective, we don't know what we're doing. My colleague Randall O'Toole, who you may be aware of, has done a lot of research, did an article in the Wall Street Journal a year ago on the driverless car. Volkswagen is very close on basically having technology where we should be able to convert at some point, maybe it's 20 or 30 years, but the fact is with GPS and so on, if cars were run by GPS, if you got into your car and you said, listen, I need to go here, you punch some numbers in, and you sit back and read a book, and it can be done, okay? All of a sudden, we aren't even going to need huge increases in highway capacity because now the cars can operate closer together and all that kind of thing. So the technology is coming. And given that the technology is so close, okay, it again makes no sense whatsoever to be putting $5 billion. And by the way, the $5 billion is really optimistic. It's probably going to be more like $7 to $10 billion. But in one line that does nothing to reduce traffic congestion. So, and again, transit in its place is wonderful, but when you go out to the end of the line there, you have to wonder, are we looking at maybe cows, or maybe we want to carry pineapple? What is it we're going to carry on this system? It's not, and again, I was very pleased to have someone drive me the whole route today. The whole route, we are talking about low suburban densities. The only place where you see buildings of any size is downtown. It makes no sense in the world. Seriously, I would hope nobody thinks they're building rail here to reduce traffic congestion, because it doesn't work. There's only one justification for building rail. You know what that is? Spending money. And at that, you will be very successful.
Well, the construction trades are happy about that.
Well, and the sad thing about it is that the construction trades would be just as well off or better off if we allowed the market to operate, allows houses to be built, development to occur, things that people really need. This is not something that is going to make a difference. This is make work.
Well, if you had, your options, if you could control it all, what would you do to improve traffic congestion? Because it is really terrible.
Oh, yeah.
And no one, in my view, is doing anything about it.
Well, I think what you do, the first thing you do is you step back and say, I don't have the answers, okay? I'm not here to tell you that highways are the only answer, and I'm not here to say that transit is not an answer and there's no role for transit. What you do is you basically say, listen, in this community, we have X number of hours of delay on travel each day. Now, by the way, that hour of delay may be that it takes you an hour to drive on the freeway where you should only take 30 minutes. It may also be because on the bus it takes you 2 hours. Delay occurs on the transit system just like it occurs on the highway system. And a lot of the planning reports in this country operate from a biased perspective that suggests there's no delay on transit, even though transit routinely takes twice as long as automobiles for most trips. So what you do is you say, okay, there are X number of hours of delay in this city on a daily basis. We would like to get that down to Y. Let's say there are 500,000 hours. I'm just picking a number out of the air, and we say it would be so much better if we could get down to 250,000 hours. How do we do that? It's a very simple economic calculation. What are the things we need to do to reduce that at the lowest cost? Not do we want shiny trains? Do we want double-deck freeways? No. No. Let us let the answers fall out of the analysis rather than the answers being given to us up front. And that's the way, it's not just in Honolulu, I'm sorry to say. That's the way transportation planning is being done in this country. Oh, we would like a train. Well, that's interesting. Are we talking about transportation or are we talking about spending money? So I would start with basically a performance program that says, what can we do? There are all sorts of answers. I mean, there are all sorts of things we can do to improve traffic movement and travel times with computer technology.
Can we talk about that? I'd like to
Sure,
talk about
sure.
that.
Well, I mean, there are various kinds of signalization programs with respect to on-ramps and so on that you can do to improve traffic flow. It's not going to solve the entire problem. There are places, for example, I can tell you from my drive on the H1 this morning, there are places where it would be expensive, but where you could get another lane or two, another lane on each side of the freeway and increase the capacity, and that is going to improve it. And while it may be expensive, what you're going to do in terms of throughput, first of all, is going to be greater than any rail system, I would bet, though I'm willing to look at the data, would bet it's going to be greater than any rail system, and it's going to be hugely less expensive. But the point is not so much to come into the room with an array of solutions. Remember, President Reagan rightly put it when he came into office, I got to Washington and I found all sorts of solutions looking for a problem. And if I've ever seen a solution looking for a problem, it's this rail system. And by the way, I don't think they found the problem yet.
You're right. Touche. Well, every day, I mean, really every day, I run into what I call it's a surprise traffic jam. And it's something I can't even predict. It's not that you could make a chart. You couldn't write it down. You don't know when or where, but you know you're going to hit something, and you do. And you kill all that time and productivity. And I say to myself, here we are. It's my goodness, it's 2012 already.
Right.
We have technology. They have it all over the world. They have technology. They can make all kinds of extraordinary, things to measure traffic, to divert traffic, to, reorganize traffic. We're not doing it. I don't know about other cities in this country. I've seen some stuff in the South, maybe, on the highways in the South, where they use sensors and signs, try to manipulate the traffic. But we don't have any of that here.
Well, go to China, for example. Go to Shanghai or Beijing, and you look, and they have great freeway systems, by the way. And in fact, if you're ever interested, do a Google search for traffic conditions in Beijing or Shanghai. Right there on the internet, as if it's LA. It's really interesting. What you'll find on the freeways in Beijing and Shanghai is these maps. It has the freeway system. And there's the red here, and there's the green here, and so on. And granted, realize you don't have a huge number of freeways, but you have the Kamehameha Highway, you have Route 92, you have the H2. The fact is that if people knew about what's going on with respect to the congestion, they might choose other routes. In addition to that, we're going to see improvements in GPS, and I think they will come not too long from now, when your GPS system will tell you there's congestion ahead, suggest an alternative. So there are those things, but there are a couple of other things, I think, with respect to highways and travel that are worth thinking about. One, and the real thing that no bureaucrat, and forgive me for putting it that way, but I see nothing from, or very little from transportation professionals in the public sector about telecommuting. Now think about telecommuting, the most sustainable form of commuting. There are no greenhouse gases. There is no traffic congestion. And you know what's happened in the last decade is telecommuting has grown so fast in this country that by 2020, there will be, assuming the trends continue, there will be more people telecommuting in this country than ride transit to work. Huge. You want to know how much money? No, we put it this way. Every year, we put about $35 to $40 billion of public money, not counting fares, into transit. 35 to 40 billion. And what do we get for that? 2% of urban travel and 5% of work trips. How much do we put into telecommuting, which today, and that's including all working at home, which today represents not 5% but 4%? How much do you think we put in? Nothing. Okay? Now, I'm not sure what the answer is and how we might use public funding to leverage an increase in telecommuting, but I can't help but believe good minds can come up with some stuff. And I realize the plumber is never going to be able to fix your pipes over the computer. At least I don't see it happening. On the other hand, you know, a lot of studies have suggested that maybe 25 or 30% of jobs could be done through telecommuting. So again, there's that. And then the other thing, one of the things you talk about the South is look at Tampa, Florida, where they built this overhead highway, 3 lanes, toll, paying for itself, cost almost nothing compared to what you're dealing with here, and essentially reduce traffic congestion very much. So there are all sorts of things. I'm not suggesting this is the answer, but there are a lot of answers which you get to by asking what is the problem we want to solve and what's the least expensive way to do it, rather than we'd like to have trains or I'd like to have a double-deck freeway.
Yeah, well, a lot of people had trains when they were kids, right?
Exactly.
Sort of locked into that with the shiny aspect. But you know, the money would be better spent. I live in Nu'uanu, okay, and there's one highway that comes down from Nu'uanu, only one. And if it's jammed, and it is jammed every day, both forward and reverse. If they had a second highway, then you wouldn't have such a thing, and it would be relief. But the problem is that you got to use condemnation, you got to spend money, people are going to be upset, they're going to lose their houses, you know, you're going to have political pushback. And so at the end of the day, it becomes a political problem, a problem of political will. So you've identified a number of things where we have a problem, a number of solutions which actually do have a problem they could solve, as opposed to rail, which is a solution without a problem. But how do you do the political will? I mean, look around the country and tell me.
Well, it is very difficult. You've got to be fair in the condemnation process and all of that kind of thing. You have to develop the political will, but it is very difficult. We've really not seen new urban freeways built in the United States in an awful long time. There are things you can do, though, and they're all very expensive. What we see a lot of in Europe, for example, is a lot of tunneling. And I'm not sure, I don't know the geography well enough to know where you live, but I mean, I know the H2, for example, I think it has a lot of tunnels, or maybe it's the H3, has a lot of tunnels as it moves north through the island. There may be ways to do that. There are ways to deal with this. They are expensive, but you do need to look at them and find out whether that is something that works. you need to recognize also at the end of the day, you have to look at each of these things and say, how much time are we going to save? And I'm not interested in saving somebody who's on a bus, who's now on the bus 60 minutes to save them down to 40 minutes, or when you're only taking 30 minutes by car. We need to be reducing the times that people are traveling. And that's the direction I think we have got to go.
Well, maybe part of developing the political will, I'm just looking for a sort of an overarching solution approach, is to have metrics on this.
Absolutely.
If I told you that you were spending 200 hours a year sitting and doing nothing, maybe that you'd be more excited about spending some money to fix it.
Well, yeah, and beyond that, I mean, some of what I've seen leads me to believe that there are some in this community who have been misled to believe that the rail system is going to reduce traffic congestion. Again, anyone who thinks that you are going to reduce traffic congestion between the airport and downtown on the H1 by building a rail system that's serving 75,000 new people out in agricultural lands doesn't understand how traffic works. And beyond that, you find, again, only 10% of the people working downtown. Most of the people couldn't even take the system if they wanted to. And so we need to understand right from the beginning that this promise of reducing traffic congestion by building rail really, really is misleading. It has not happened anywhere.
Well, I asked you before about the best case analysis, what rail could do, and we talked about, downtown to East Kapolei. But what's the worst case analysis in terms of what rail could do? Because rail in other places in the country, the world, Lower Manhattan, it's been a blight. In Brooklyn, it's been a blight. Could that happen here? Is that a necessary function of rail?
This is one of the unfortunate things, especially with respect to elevated rail. I mean, when someone told me, I can't remember who it was originally, and I know this rail project has increased in price unbelievably just in 4 or 5 years. When I heard that this system was going to cost $5 billion, I presumed that you were going to be underground. I mean, $5 billion overground, that is unbelievable. Now, there are a lot of people that sort of think that, well, the old L system running, on Myrtle Avenue in Brooklyn, it's not going to look like that. These are nice. There is no way to make an elevated transportation structure through a city look good. I don't care if it's rail or highway or whatever. It destroys the community. Look at what happened, I think it's on 5th Avenue in Seattle. 1962, we have the World Fair. We build this marvelous advanced monorail system that's never been copied anywhere in the world, of course. And we wipe out all the businesses along the route that it's on. That routinely happens. And I've seen the artist rendering on this thing. My goodness, it is oppressive. The only places I have seen stations that look as bad as this, and if you come tomorrow, I might show you a picture of one I took in Tokyo. Unbelievable, oppressive, over-the-street stations, or in Bangkok, outside the shopping center that burned down.
I've been there.
Yeah, well, the one that burnt down. Have you been at that place where the 2 lines out in front of the central shop?
Yeah.
My goodness, it's unbelievable.
Overpowering.
Oh, unbelievable. So I mean, you absolutely ruin the landscape. Now, you can somehow the Japanese have been much more tolerant of that kind of architectural monstrosity than we've been, and of course Thailand's a little bit different. They aren't as advanced economically as we are. But I can't help but think in the long run that first of all, it's going to cause serious dislocation of any businesses that happen to be there, and that nobody is going to be very happy with what it looks like.
Beyond the aesthetics, though, you have a vacuum. The businesses fail. You have these huge structures. They're dark underneath. It's hard to, enjoy being there. They are a magnet for crime, no?
Right.
And that's what happens. Even in Portland, which is a pretty clean and open kind of city, they do rail, and I remember reading that the amount of crime on the rail cars was extraordinary, considering that the rest of this, that it hadn't happened before then. It seemed to generate bad numbers.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I've seen the stuff out of Portland, and that is concerning. I have not seen any good national studies that sort of deal with this. But again, these are issues that need to be considered when you make these decisions,
And then you got the homeless.
Right.
The homeless who move from place to place, who always like to have shelter over them.
Isn't that strange?
Well, some people in this town actually say that the homeless want to be homeless. I could never get used to that. But, they would find rail structures a great way to go, and they'd stay there, and you'd find that instead of the vibrant business communities that might have existed, now we have the homeless living under the rail structure.
Well, what has happened, and this isn't going to happen here because at least with all your homeless difficulties, I don't believe you've got shanty towns.
Not yet.
Okay, and that's the real.
Not in any size.
Yeah, that's the real scourge in the third world, and underneath rail systems and adjacent to rail systems and underneath highways is the prime place for these kinds of things to develop. But there's no doubt. I mean, if you have a lot of homeless people, they are going to generally gravitate, at least at night, toward places where there's shelter, and this is going to provide an awful lot of shelter for 20 long miles.
Yeah, boy, this will be the biggest aesthetic and community change, that ever happened to Hawaii, and be the most expensive and most questionable public works project that ever happened in the state. And here we are, sitting on the brink of it, and the reality is, aside from the case that Ben Caetano and his friends filed, we're on the track. We're going down the track. If you follow the rail as you did,
right,
the path of the rail, you saw some construction equipment ready to do stuff. And we're right at the intersection right now. You could not be here at a more propitious time.
Well, and you look at, for example, the letter that came from the FTA administrator in San Francisco to local officials, I think last week or the week before, basically said we continue to have serious problems about the financial program here. Your get tax revenues are not keeping up. In order to fund this system, you're going to need action out of the state legislature, and we have serious concerns about going forward with a full funding agreement from the federal government. Now, I don't know what the outcome of that is going to be, but to the extent that your officials are going ahead and spending money, they are putting themselves, putting the taxpayers of the city and county of Honolulu at great risk. I don't know the outcome of this, but there's plenty of concern. I mean, the IMG report, the state report that Governor Lingle commissioned, basically said that it's very clear that the rail system alone will tax the debt limits of the cities. The FTA, the federal government, the Federal Transit Administration, has said basically the same thing. So this is a big deal. And this is before you consider the fact that, think about, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, you think about, in the case of Boston, we had a $4 billion highway program. It grew to 15, okay? And
4 times.
But that doesn't count the $7 billion of additional interest that had not been planned.
Yes,
okay?
and that was Parsons Brinkerhoff. The same
I
contract.
don't know, but
it
was. Okay. Are they here?
Yes.
Oh, all right. Well, anyway, the interesting thing, though, is you go around, you find this kind of cost escalation going on. Again, the state of Hawaii report suggested that the city could be obligated to spend between $1.7 billion and $4.5 billion of additional money in operating and capital expense. So I think you are at great risk. I think that, there's international research on this. A guy by the name of Bent Flyberg is a professor at Oxford University in England, and they've done some major work looking at infrastructure projects around the world and found generally that rail projects tend to cost 45% more than promised, and sometimes they cost 100% more than promised. And as I look at what's going on in this community, I see all sorts of factors that suggest you are at great risk.
Well, there's 2 points you've made that stick with me. One is that we're under tremendous fiscal stress now, both Hawaii and other places. And the second is this project is going to cost more than we expect. And when you put those two elements together, you collapse that, what you have is a real disaster. Because it means that we ultimately could go bankrupt over this. Not only bankrupt, it's a long way to bankruptcy. It's that process of having the economy deteriorate around you, all the goods and services you're supposed to get from government, you're not getting them, and your life settles down to a lot less than it was. Bankruptcy is the last stop. But there's a long way to go to get there.
Yeah, and the point is that, and bankruptcy is something that the city and county ought to be working very hard not to go into, and most of the cities around the country have been able to avoid that. The big problem is the standard of living of the people that live here, okay? And there's just no question if you spend $5 billion or $7 billion or $10 billion on something you don't need, okay, and then you add to it all these other challenges you've got, the standard of living here cannot be as good as it would have been otherwise. And that's the real issue that ought to be driving policy.
It all makes me think of a frog.
How's that?
If you put a frog in boiling water, he will jump right out.
Right.
If you put him in cold water and turn up the heat little by little, he'll boil to death.
Yeah.
And I don't think that people recognize the processes and factors and dynamics that you're talking about. So little by little, we're being boiled. I don't think we're at a danger point, quite yet, but we're getting close.
Well, and you want to know how Europe got into the mess that it's in? Exactly that way. Nobody understood what they were doing right from the start, and that's where they are. I don't know how they get out of it.
So what's your advice to the people?
The advice is I really believe you need to stop this thing as quickly as possible. It really, you're getting $1.5 billion from the federal government, maybe if you're lucky. It isn't worth it. You're spending 3.7, maybe twice that to build this system, and you're not getting anything for it. I mean, you don't know what the consent decree is really going to cost you in the long run. You don't know how much the water system is going to be able to restore the pipeline system of the city to the point in the next 5 years. I mean, maybe we've got another 70% worth of increases occurring after that. We don't know what's going to happen with respect to pensions and the pension funding. And what we do know, though, is we have no choice. These things must be paid for. Thus, it is worth thinking about not buying the things we don't need.
Wendell, I wish you well in your conference tomorrow, and I hope you come back soon. And I hope we can get the word out on what you're saying so that people will understand a little better about what they're facing.
Good, thank you.
Welcome to Hawaii, and come back again as much as you can.
Good, okay, thanks a lot.
Wendell Cox, thank you so much.
Okay.